At approximately 4:20 a.m. on April 25, 2021, the phone at the Ishikawa police station in Chiba Prefecture suddenly rang. On the other end was the trembling voice of a woman in her 60s named Fujiko Himeno. Her voice choked with emotion as she explained that she was seriously injured and desperately needed emergency police assistance. Upon receiving the report, 2 police officers immediately rushed to the scene. The sight that greeted them was heartbreaking. Fujiko lay in a terrible state with multiple broken ribs on her left side, her body covered with clear signs of brutal beating. In a weak voice, she recounted to the police the horrific attack she had just endured in her own home. The perpetrator had not only beaten her mercilessly, but had also used rope to tie her hands and feet, making her a prisoner in her own house. It wasn't until 4:15 a.m., when the criminal finally left the house, that she managed to summon her remaining strength to escape from the ropes and call for help. But the most shocking and unbelievable part was the identity of the perpetrator. None other than Daigo Ikura, the victim's 30-year-old son. This cruel truth made the case more serious than ever. Recognizing the particularly dangerous nature of the case, police immediately launched a comprehensive investigation plan. While some officers stayed behind to protect and assist Fujiko, others immediately began the manhunt for the perpetrator. They didn't have to wait long. Around 9 a.m. that same day, police discovered a young man acting suspiciously near the scene. When 2 officers approached to investigate, they quickly identified him as Daigo Ikura, the son they were looking for. Without any resistance, Daigo was immediately arrested on charges of intentional assault and unlawful imprisonment. However, this was only the tip of the iceberg. When formal interrogation began and investigators dug deeper into every detail, a terrifying truth gradually emerged. Daigo Ikura was born in 1990 in the Nida area of Ichikawa City, Chiba Prefecture, into a relatively well-off family. His father held an important position at a prestigious local advertising company, while his mother, Fujiko, worked as a temporary employee at the same company. The early years of Daigo's life took place in a relatively peaceful and stable family atmosphere. However, in 1995, when little Daigo had just turned 5, the small family's life began to undergo major changes. Due to work requirements, his father had to move to work in England, and the entire family decided to emigrate together, beginning a journey to rebuild their lives in a distant land. The early days of settling in England were not easy at all. The family had to struggle with language barriers and major cultural differences. However, amid the family's shared difficulties, little Daigo showed remarkable adaptability. Not only did he maintain his connection to his native culture by continuing to use Japanese in family communication, but he also quickly absorbed and mastered English, gradually integrating into his new life. However, behind that harmonious exterior, the seeds of tragedy had begun to sprout within the small family nest. Fujiko's husband had a violent temperament and frequently vented his anger on his gentle wife. The incidents of domestic violence were not just simple arguments but truly brutal beatings. Living in the suffocating atmosphere of intense quarrels and constant fear, Fujiko finally had to make a painful but unavoidable decision to separate from her husband and raise Daigo on her own. But the path of single motherhood in a foreign land was not as easy as Fujiko had hoped. She not only had to bear the entire economic burden of the family alone, but also had to face constant surveillance and harassment from her ex-husband. Realizing that the current living environment could not provide the stability necessary for her son's education and development, when Daigo turned 11, she decided to send him back to Japan. Meanwhile, Fujiko herself had to stay in England to continue working, supporting herself, and sending money back to provide for her son. When he returned to his homeland, Daigo lived with his maternal grandparents, aunt, and uncle. They tried their best to compensate for some of the family affection the boy had lost. Daigo attended an international school. Although he had to live away from both his father and mother, at least the financial responsibility for Daigo's education was still assumed by his father. 2 years passed and both of Daigo's parents decided to return to Japan, formally completing their divorce proceedings. In the court's ruling, custody of Daigo was awarded to his father. So after many years of separation, the son was able to live under the same roof as his father again. But the dream of a reunited family didn't last long. The father quickly entered a new marriage, and the appearance of a stepmother completely changed the family structure once again. Perhaps feeling uncomfortable with the complexity of the new family relationships, or simply wanting his son to have a better educational environment, the father decided to send Daigo to a boarding school. This time, the teenager had to truly face the challenge of living independently in a completely unfamiliar environment. Surprisingly, despite having to go through constant upheavals in family life and always having to adapt to new environments, Daigo showed remarkable academic ability. Thanks to these impressive academic results, after graduating from high school, Daigo was accepted to the University of British Columbia in Canada. However, just when he needed financial support the most, his father suddenly announced he would not provide the tuition funding he had previously committed to. Fujiko, though wanting to help her son with all her heart, was truly powerless before the enormous educational and living expenses abroad with her modest income. Facing the risk of having to abandon his studies and future dreams, Daigo made a decision to sell illegal substances. Perhaps thanks to his innate intelligence and ability to remain calm in tense situations that he had learned through life's upheavals, Daigo not only earned enough money to cover tuition, but could also take care of his daily life, eventually completing his university program smoothly. Returning to Japan with a prestigious university degree in hand, Daigo quickly found a position at a reputable multinational company. His talent and international experience made Daigo's career advance rapidly with an impressive salary of over $5,200 per month, a figure that made many peers envious. After years of wandering and hardship, his life seemed to finally be getting on a stable track. It was in this dynamic work environment that fate arranged for Daigo to meet Yuko, a talented and beautiful female colleague. Love between them blossomed naturally and intensely. In just a short time, they decided to move in together, though they hadn't officially registered their marriage. In October 2018, Daigo and Yuko decided to buy a luxury apartment worth $10.8 million in Minato Ward, one of Tokyo's most prestigious areas. The couple's happiness was completed when in January 2019, Yuko gave birth to their first son. Looking from the outside, Daigo's small family was the perfect model of success in modern society. A talented man with a stable job and high income, a gentle and loving woman, a luxurious apartment in a prestigious neighborhood, and a healthy, adorable child. This was exactly the picture of happiness that many others could only dream of. However, just when life was gradually stabilizing, Daigo began to be drawn into the whirlpool of material luxury. If he had simply improved his quality of life within his income range, that would still be acceptable. But unfortunately, Daigo couldn't do that. He gradually lost control, spending increasingly beyond his actual income. This spending beyond his means quickly threw his financial situation into crisis. To maintain that lavish lifestyle, Daigo began selling valuable items on secondhand platforms. But what's noteworthy is that most of these were not his property, but items he had stolen from relatives' homes. What was even more shocking was that within his own home, Daigo not only failed to fulfill the role and responsibilities of a husband and father, but gradually revealed his violent nature. Just 3 months after his son was born, he was arrested by police for domestic violence against Yuko. Although he later avoided prosecution by paying $22,400 in compensation, this shock became the last straw that officially pushed their relationship to the brink of collapse. Yuko completely lost faith in Daigo. In October 2019, less than a year after they had bought the apartment together to start their life, Yuko left that house with their child, ending her de facto marriage with Daigo. From then on, she single-handedly bore the responsibility of raising their child. As for Daigo, he continued to live alone in the apartment that had once been expected to be the home of a family of 3. Not long after breaking up with Yuko, Daigo quickly met a new girlfriend named Miwa. Having a new lover, he became even more indifferent to Yuko and his son's lives, almost completely cutting off contact. He had never proactively taken on the role of being a father, nor cared about the responsibility of supporting the young child. Faced with this cold indifference, Yuko was forced to choose the legal route. She filed with family court, demanding shared child support costs while also definitively resolving the issue of joint apartment ownership and home loan repayment responsibilities, matters that were rightfully both parties' rights and obligations. After mediation, Yuko ultimately won custody of their child, along with fixed monthly child support from Daigo. Additionally, she was compensated for her previous contribution to the apartment loan, plus compensation for the increased value of the apartment. On Daigo's side, he retained full ownership of the apartment. At that time, Daigo was still working for a foreign enterprise and confident that with his high salary, he could completely pay off the remaining debt on the apartment himself. However, reality wasn't as he thought. Despite good income, Daigo had long been accustomed to a lifestyle of excessive spending. Insufficient income to cover expenses quickly threw him into financial crisis. To avoid defaulting on his house payments, Daigo began managing by borrowing from various financial institutions, trying to reduce cash pressure in the short term. But this very approach of robbing Peter to pay Paul made his financial situation increasingly worse. In less than a year, Daigo's total debt had exceeded $224,000. Helplessly, he turned to his uncle Watanabe for help, asking to borrow $172,000. Watanabe and his wife, Junko Himeno, had always treated him like their own son. Even though at the time Daigo asked to borrow money, Watanabe had divorced Hiroko, Daigo's aunt, he didn't hesitate to help Daigo. However, even with this enormous sum from his uncle in hand, Daigo still couldn't fill the financial hole caused by years of wasteful spending. The prolonged deficit situation made him increasingly mired in trouble. On December 6, 2020, Daigo arbitrarily sold a pearl ring and many precious family heirlooms. This act was eventually discovered by his mother, Fujiko. Extremely angry and disappointed, she immediately demanded that Daigo return all the property. However, by this point, Daigo had fallen too deep into the vortex of difficulties. He was no longer lucid enough to listen to advice from his mother. On December 7th, Daigo went to his mother Fujiko's house. The conversation between mother and son quickly turned into a heated argument. While losing emotional control, Daigo suddenly resorted to violence. He strangled his mother, then pushed her to the ground and repeatedly stomped on her body. This cruel act caused Fujiko serious injuries in multiple areas of her body, requiring 14 days of hospitalization. After that incident, Daigo temporarily stopped stealing property from relatives. However, instead of stopping, he shifted his target to his workplace. In February 2021, Daigo broke into the company safe and stole cash. This act was quickly discovered. He was immediately arrested by police and simultaneously fired by the company. From someone who once had a stable job and warm family, Daigo had now slid down the slope of crime, losing relatives, career, and honor. Losing his stable income source not only meant he couldn't maintain his previously lavish lifestyle, but more seriously, he could no longer borrow money from financial institutions. Drowning in debt amounting to tens of millions of yen, Daigo was like a desperate drowning person seeking a final lifeline. While searching for financial solutions, he discovered a relatively new product on the market, the reverse mortgage system. The idea of this product was quite appealing to people in difficult situations like Daigo. Instead of having to sell their house for money, property owners could continue living in their own homes while using them as collateral to borrow money from banks. As soon as the contract was signed, borrowers would receive a lump sum based on the property's value, then continue to be supported with monthly living allowances. What was special about this product was that borrowers didn't need to repay debt during their lifetime. Only when they passed away would financial institutions sell the house to recover the loaned money plus accumulated interest. Because of this, the product was often advertised as an ideal solution for elderly people living alone, helping them enjoy comfortable lives without worrying about having to leave their familiar homes. In Daigo's mind, his grandmother's house was like a treasure waiting to be exploited. Through rough calculations, he estimated that if he could mortgage this house, he would immediately receive at least $299,000, a sum large enough to solve most of his current financial difficulties. However, when he delved deeper into understanding the conditions and procedures, Daigo hit a legal barrier he couldn't overcome. The strict regulations of the reverse mortgage system required that the person actually living in the house must be the legal owner recorded in the property deed. This was exactly the bottleneck of his plan. The problem lay in the fact that after her marriage with Watanabe ended, Aunt Hiroko had decided to move in with their elderly, frail grandmother. This decision stemmed from two practical reasons. On one hand, grandmother was bedridden and needed regular care. On the other hand, Hiroko also needed stable housing after her divorce. However, despite living in this house as the actual owner, Hiroko was not the legal owner of the property. This very fact caused Daigo's loan application to stall. Once again facing financial deadlock, Daigo had to turn back to Uncle Watanabe for help. This time, he asked for another $89,600, bringing the total amount borrowed from him to an enormous sum. Watanabe, with his generous heart and love for his nephew, once again extended his arms to help. However, instead of expressing sincere gratitude to the person who had treated him like his own son, he secretly made terrible plans. While helping Watanabe organize household items, Daigo secretly stole spare keys, as well as a credit card registered under Watanabe's mother's name. Not stopping there, on April 2nd, he also stole two valuable paintings that Watanabe had collected. Just one day later, these artworks were being sold by Daigo on online websites. Not stopping there, he also used the stolen credit card to buy himself an expensive Rolex watch. What was even more concerning was that Daigo didn't act alone in this fraud. He had dragged his own mother Fujiko into it, making her an accomplice in his crime. When making the transaction to buy the Rolex watch, Fujiko had to play the role of Watanabe's mother, forging signatures on documents confirming credit card use. On April 4th, Watanabe discovered that the valuable paintings had disappeared from his house. At the same time, he also received notifications about suspicious transactions on his mother's credit card. Watanabe immediately contacted police to report the theft and fraud. However, when reviewing security camera footage, Watanabe recognized that it was all caused by Fujiko and Daigo. Despite being betrayed so cruelly, with his forgiving heart, he proactively withdrew the complaint, citing that this might just be an elderly person's confusion. He hoped that everything could be resolved peacefully. That same evening, Watanabe invited Daigo to his private home in Funabashi City for a frank conversation. He hoped that through understanding and dialogue, they could find a way to resolve the issue gently without legal intervention. In this meeting, under pressure from undeniable evidence, Daigo was forced to admit his wrongdoing. He promised to repay the entire $6,700 that he had illegally used from the credit card. But Watanabe could never know that at that time, Daigo had lost his job and had absolutely no financial ability to fulfill his promise. More importantly, beneath his outward appearance of remorse, hatred was growing in Daigo's heart. Returning home after the meeting with Watanabe, Daigo didn't feel relieved or grateful. Instead, in his mind, a cold and cruel calculation process had begun. In his list of problems, there were two most prominent names. First was Aunt Hiroko, the legal barrier preventing him from accessing $299,000 from the reverse mortgage loan. Second was Watanabe, the generous man who had lent him a total of $261,000, but who now had become an enormous debt weighing on his shoulders. In Daigo's twisted mind, if these two people disappeared, all his financial troubles would be resolved neatly. On April 8th, Daigo began systematically searching for information about antifreeze on the internet. Through his research, he gained deadly information. Ethylene glycol, the main component of antifreeze, has a naturally sweet taste, easily dissolves in both water and alcohol, and most importantly, it can cause death if used in sufficient doses. Not stopping at researching poison, on April 13th, Daigo also expanded his research scope to arson. Over the next 2 days, he conducted a total of 22 searches about methods of burning houses and watched 29 related instructional videos. After equipping himself with enough theoretical knowledge, Daigo proceeded with the first step of his murder plan. He bought antifreeze and carefully mixed it into whiskey and Coca-Cola, information he had obtained through his mother. These bottles of drinks containing death were carefully prepared, and Daigo brought them to Fujiko's house, ready to commit the first crime in his terrifying chain of plans. With a friendly face, Daigo invited Aunt Hiroko to his mother's house under the pretext of wanting to treat her. Hiroko didn't suspect anything when enjoying the drinks her nephew had prepared, even taking the remainder home at Daigo's suggestion. Immediately after Hiroko left, Daigo revealed the terrifying truth to his mother. He admitted to mixing antifreeze into the drinks and confidently stated that this method was very difficult to detect without autopsy, something he said was not uncommon in America. Daigo also shared about his meeting with Watanabe and his firm attitude about not wanting to repay the debt. Fujiko was completely shocked by her son's murderous plan. But when she showed concern, Daigo immediately threatened to burn down the house if she didn't cooperate. He demanded his mother monitor Hiroko's health condition to assess the effectiveness of his plan. Faced with the situation, Fujiko was forced to agree. The situation became even more serious when on April 15th, Daigo brought 2 one-gallon gas cans to the house and declared these were for setting fire to Watanabe's house. Despite Fujiko's attempts to stop him, advising her son not to say such terrible things, Daigo's subsequent threats forced her into fearful silence. On April 19th, Daigo and Fujiko visited grandmother's house. However, despite multiple exposures to the poison, Hiroko still showed no serious signs as Daigo had hoped. Seeing that his initial plan wasn't effective, Daigo decided to escalate his actions. He lied that the antifreeze was a special medicine imported from abroad and convinced Hiroko to drink it directly. When this still didn't achieve the desired result, Daigo continued pouring more antifreeze into her mouth, then dragged the unconscious Hiroko near the stairs and cruelly pushed her down. After committing this act, Daigo carefully erased traces by handling evidence. He instructed Fujiko to stay and care for grandmother, and specifically ordered no action to be taken before 11 a.m. on April 23rd. Daigo's plan was to let some time pass. Then Fujiko would accidentally discover and report to police, creating the appearance of a natural death from an accident. At 11 a.m. on April 23rd, following Daigo's exact instructions, Fujiko called police saying that because she couldn't contact her sister, she had come to visit and accidentally discovered that Hiroko had died. When arriving at the scene, police noticed injuries on the victim's head and body consistent with falling downstairs. However, because no additional suspicious signs were discovered and the scene appeared normal, the case wasn't treated as a criminal matter. An autopsy was also not performed. And so, Daigo's carefully calculated crime escaped the attention of investigative agencies. He had succeeded in eliminating one obstacle, without leaving a trace. But Daigo didn't stop. After Hiroko's death, his next target was Uncle Watanabe, the person to whom he owed $261,000. Around 12:10 a.m. on April 25th, Daigo continued searching online. How to start fires in buildings and how fires spread. After planning and rehearsing thoroughly, he drove to his mother's house. This time his intention was to recreate the scenario of eliminating Hiroko, and he wanted to drag his mother, Fujiko, into the plan to kill Uncle Watanabe. But unlike the previous time, this time Fujiko firmly refused. Around 3 a.m., after being refused by his mother to participate in the plan to kill Uncle Watanabe, Daigo flew into a rage. He repeatedly hit Fujiko's face and chest, then used duct tape to cover his mother's mouth, tying her hands and feet with rope, completely controlling all her movements. Not stopping there, Daigo also took about $1,050 in cash from the house. After that, he poured the previously prepared gasoline into plastic bottles, the final step in his arson plan. Around 4:12 a.m., Daigo drove alone to Uncle Watanabe's house in Funabashi City. He secretly used the spare key he had previously stolen to sneak into the house while everyone was sleeping. Around 4:33 a.m., Daigo poured gasoline on a chair placed in the first-floor living room, lit it with a lighter, then quickly retreated. He stood outside, coldly watching the flames ignite and spread until the entire house was engulfed in fire, then left the scene. Around 4:35 a.m., Uncle Watanabe, who was sleeping on the second floor at the time, discovered the fire. In panic, he called police for help, but the flames and toxic smoke had quickly enveloped the upper floor. While still holding the phone, he gradually lost consciousness and ultimately couldn't escape the burning house. After investigation, police confirmed that Watanabe remained conscious for at least 25 minutes in the sea of fire, enduring hellish pain before dying. A death that was both tragic and wrongful. He was completely innocent. Not only had he never harmed Daigo, but he had even extended his hand to help when Daigo was in his most desperate situation. However, in return, he had to suffer a tragic end, cruelly caused by the very person he had once considered his own son. While Uncle Watanabe's house was engulfed in flames, Fujiko, who was being held captive by Daigo at home, managed to escape from her bonds by any means necessary. Despite carrying serious injuries with broken ribs on her left side, she still managed to call police. This brave action opened a crucial turning point for the entire case. After Daigo was arrested, police began reviewing all recent events, especially the unusual death of Hiroko, who had died just 2 days earlier but wasn't considered a victim of a criminal case. Fortunately, Hiroko's body had not yet been cremated. Police immediately conducted a forensic autopsy. The autopsy results showed that the cause of Hiroko's death was not a stair-falling accident, as initially suspected, but poisoning, a deliberate planned act, and certainly murder. Daigo faced a series of serious charges: theft, murder, arson, and property destruction. Not only Daigo, but Fujiko was also caught up in legal troubles. Because she was the one who had called to report Hiroko's case and had directly participated in staging the scene, police were forced to arrest her on suspicion of being an accomplice to murder and fraud. From here, both mother and son were officially prosecuted, and the horrific case entered criminal trial procedures. At Fujiko's trial, the defendant firmly denied complicity in murder. She insisted that she was forced to cooperate under circumstances of serious threats from her own son, Daigo. Fujiko's defense attorney argued that she was a manipulated victim, didn't actively participate, had no ability to resist, and therefore shouldn't be prosecuted for murder. The defense emphasized that Fujiko didn't directly carry out the poisoning or pushing of the victim, nor did she have intent to kill, so they requested an acquittal. Meanwhile, the prosecution painted a completely different picture. They pointed out that after being fired by his company, Daigo fell into financial crisis and needed a large sum of money to escape his debt situation. To qualify for a reverse mortgage loan, Daigo had to eliminate Hiroko, the person who shared ownership of the apartment with his mother. Therefore, he planned to kill Hiroko, then Watanabe, to achieve his financial goals. The prosecution argued that the case wasn't a series of random accidents, but calculated murders disguised as coincidences to avoid suspicion. Regarding Fujiko's role specifically, the prosecution argued that she had expressed dissatisfaction with Hiroko, the sister who didn't care much about caring for their mother, and she herself was also in financial difficulty. These factors were said to have caused her to choose to turn a blind eye, even assist her son in covering up the crime. Although not directly acting, Fujiko's cooperation had played an important role in completing the criminal plan. Therefore, the prosecution requested sentencing Fujiko to 11 years in prison. On December 6, 2022, Chiba District Court officially announced the first instance verdict for defendant Fujiko Himeno. As a result, she was sentenced to 9 years in prison. In the ruling, the court determined that although Fujiko was not the person who directly committed murder, she was fully aware of her son's criminal intent. Not only did she not prevent it, but she chose to cooperate. After Hiroko was poisoned, Fujiko also didn't take any action to help or report the incident, showing a level of complicity that couldn't be ignored. The presiding judge emphasized that although Fujiko lived in dependent circumstances and was influenced by her son, this couldn't erase her moral and legal responsibility. She had shown coldness and indifference to her biological sister's fate, and this behavior, though not proactive, had contributed to pushing the tragedy forward. Her role might be lesser, but it absolutely couldn't be called innocent. After the verdict was announced, Fujiko showed dissatisfaction and proceeded to appeal. However, the appeal was rejected. Meanwhile, the trial of Daigo Ikura, the person directly responsible for the series of murders, arson, and violence, showed a completely opposite attitude. In court, Daigo vigorously defended his actions, denying all financial motives. He declared that his purpose wasn't to borrow money, but was to help his mother achieve economic independence. Regarding the act of poisoning Aunt Hiroko, Daigo testified that he only wanted her to feel uncomfortable about her health so she would voluntarily move to a nursing home, having absolutely no intention to kill. He also denied ever saying, "Without autopsy, it won't be discovered," and claimed that because he grew up abroad, he didn't understand what autopsy meant. Even more, Daigo described his entire behavior as a joke, due to being influenced by foreign culture. However, Daigo's convoluted defense was quickly and strongly refuted by his own mother, Fujiko, right in court. The confrontation between mother and son became extremely tense, leading to intense arguments that made the courtroom atmosphere nearly lose control for a short time. Regarding the arson charge that killed Uncle Watanabe, Daigo continued to deny premeditation. He testified that after Aunt Hiroko's death, his mood became chaotic. Then in a moment of impulse, he developed the intention to kill Uncle Watanabe. However, the prosecution completely rejected this defense. They presented a series of clear evidence. Daigo had researched fire-starting methods in detail, bought gasoline beforehand, and made detailed plans about the timing of the crime. This wasn't impulsive action, but a carefully calculated crime with clear intent and extremely high danger level. Additionally, the defendant's attitude after committing the crime, showing no remorse, even trying to blame his mother, showed his cold, unfeeling, and dangerous nature. From these arguments, the prosecution requested sentencing Daigo Ikura to life imprisonment. The defense attorney presented an opposing view, arguing that Daigo committed crimes under circumstances of being fired, under great pressure from property division after his marriage collapse. They described the defendant as someone with a turbulent upbringing and unstable psychology, therefore requesting the court consider reducing punishment and impose a fixed-term prison sentence. On July 24, 2023, Chiba District Court officially issued the first-instance verdict for defendant Daigo Ikura. In the sentencing, the presiding judge emphasized that the entire chain of criminal acts were led and proactively carried out by Daigo, while Fujiko only played a supporting role. The defendant had proactively sought information about antifreeze, but never searched for any emergency treatment methods. In the arson murder of Uncle Watanabe, Daigo prepared gasoline in advance, fully knowing the serious consequences, but still deliberately carrying it out to the end. The presiding judge concluded, this was premeditated murder, planned in advance, with particularly cruel methods and particularly serious social harm. Therefore, the court decided to sentence Daigo Ikura to life imprisonment. Daigo immediately appealed. But his appeal was rejected. The Daigo Ikura case is not only a series of horrific crimes planned meticulously and coldly, but also a mirror reflecting deep breakdowns in family relationships, personal morality, and human values. From someone who once had a good job and complete family, Daigo gradually lost everything: reason, family affection, gratitude, only to push himself down the darkest path of law and conscience. And that concludes today's case. Thank you for following along, and we'll see you in the next videos.